Tonight, our story begins with a young man on a train. A young man who has just faced the first great professional heartbreak of his life. The history you and I know tells us this. In the boisterous, hopeful landscape of the 1920s, a young Walt Disney, full of ambition and a unique talent for charming cartoons, was making a name for himself. After some early stumbles in Kansas City with his Laugh-O-Gram studio, he had found his footing in Hollywood. His great success, his first real star, wasn't a mouse. It was a rabbit. A long-eared, mischievous, and incredibly popular rabbit named Oswald. Hit like and subscribe if you're with us tonight. Oswald the Lucky Rabbit was a hit. Walt and his small, loyal team, including his master animator and old friend Ub Iwerks, were churning out cartoons that delighted audiences. In 1928, Walt took a train to New York City to meet with his distributor, a man named Charles Mintz, to negotiate a new and hopefully more profitable contract for the next series of Oswald shorts. Walt was optimistic. He felt the wind at his back. But the meeting was a disaster. It was a cold, hard lesson in the realities of business. Mintz not only refused to give Walt a better deal, he informed him that he, Mintz, had gone behind Walt's back and signed away most of his key animators to a new contract. And then came the final blow, the one that must have felt like a punch to the gut. Mintz revealed that Universal Studios, not Walt Disney, owned the intellectual property rights to Oswald. The rabbit was no longer his. He had lost everything, his creation, his staff, and his income, all in one fell swoop. And so, we come to that long, lonely train ride back to California. A 27-year-old Walt, his dreams in tatters, the click-clack of the rails measuring out the miles of his defeat. History tells us that on this very journey, with nothing left but his imagination and a sketch pad, he doodled a new character. He took the long, floppy ears of the rabbit he had lost and rounded them. He simplified the design, gave him a cheerful, plucky spirit and a name. Mortimer at first, until his wife Lillian suggested the friendlier name of Mickey. And the rest, as they say, is history. A history of iconic characters, of theme parks, of a global empire built on the back of that one, resilient mouse. But this is where we step off the beaten path. This is where we find the tall grass and a faint trail leading away into the twilight. Because on that train, Walt was not just an animator. He was a man, hurt and disillusioned. The world of cute, marketable animals had just betrayed him. A rabbit had been stolen from him. You have to wonder, would his first instinct truly be to create another one? To simply try again with a different species? Perhaps. But what if it wasn't? Imagine, for a moment, on that same train, rattling across the vast, dark plains of America, Walt isn't sketching. His pad is closed. He's staring out the window, but he isn't really seeing the passing landscape. In his lap is a book he'd picked up for a few cents from a dusty cart in New York, something to pass the time. It's a slim volume on medieval art, filled with reproductions of illuminated manuscripts. He's not interested in the grand, pious paintings of saints and kings that dominate the center of each page. His eye, the eye of an animator, of a man who lives in the margins of things, is drawn to the marginalia, to the wild, whimsical, and utterly bizarre little doodles that the monks, perhaps out of boredom or a suppressed sense of mischief, drew along the borders of the sacred texts. Snails fighting knights, birds with human heads, and machines. Oh, the machines. elaborate, nonsensical, wonderful machines, contraptions with no discernible purpose. A series of gears powered by a hamster in a wheel that operates a bellows, which in turn gently puffs a feather that tickles a sleeping cat. A trebuchet designed not to fling rocks, but to delicately place a single grape into a distant goblet. Water wheels that power an endless series of tiny, automated puppets in a perpetual parade. They are machines born not of industry, but of pure, unadulterated whimsy. He turns a page, and a small, sad smile touches his lips for the first time in days. He looks at these impossible, beautiful contraptions, built of wood and brass and rope, and he thinks, they have character, they have personality, they have a story. But unlike a rabbit, nobody owns them. They belong to the quiet, forgotten corners of history. And so we ask our question: what if, on that long train ride home, Walt Disney, stung by the world of commercial animals, decided not to create Mickey Mouse, but to bring to life the forgotten, whimsical machines of the medieval imagination? The consequences of that decision wouldn't be loud or explosive. They would be a gentle, steady, and constant whirring, a soft ticking that would alter the entire rhythm of animation history. When Walt arrives back in Los Angeles, he doesn't gather his remaining few loyalists, including Ub Iwerks, to pitch them on a mouse. He unrolls his sketches from the train, not of a character, but of a mechanism. "Look at this," he says, his voice full of a new, quieter kind of excitement. It's a self-watering plant pot, a series of tiny aqueducts fed by the morning dew collected in a copper funnel, which then tips a small bucket that waters a single, very surprised-looking daisy. Ub Iwerks, the practical genius, squints at the drawing. He's not being asked to create believable emotion in a cartoon animal's face. He's being asked to work out the physics of a miniature, nonsensical irrigation system. The challenge appeals to the engineer in him, the tinkerer who loved cameras and projectors as much as he loved drawing. "The fulcrum on that bucket is too high," Ub says, already grabbing a pencil. "It'll tip too soon, and the gears need to be brass for the weight." And just like that, the Disney Brothers studio is reborn. But it's a different place. The air isn't filled with attempts to find the perfect squeak for a mouse or the right waddle for a duck. The atmosphere is more like a watchmaker's shop or a benevolent inventor's workshop. The sounds are of soft, rhythmic scratching of ink pens on paper, the low murmur of men debating the tensile strength of an animated rope, and the occasional, satisfying click as they imagine a gear locking into place. The aesthetic of their new art form is entirely different. It's not about bright, round, bouncy characters. It's about the beauty of the mechanism. The animations are rendered with the fine, cross-hatched detail of a woodcut. The color palette, when it eventually arrives, is muted and warm. The sepia of old parchment, the deep glow of polished copper and brass, the soft gray of worn stone. The principle of animation changes, too. It's less about squash and stretch to create rubbery life, and more about process and rhythm. The beauty isn't in a character's exaggerated reaction, but in the mesmerizing, hypnotic movement of a perfectly synchronized series of moving parts. It's animation as a form of mechanical ballet. Their first project is not a frantic 7-minute chase scene. It's a quiet, contemplative short film they call, simply, The Self-Sorting Library. There is no villain. There is no hero. The star of the film is a room, a vast, circular library, and the elaborate, gentle machine that tends it. The cartoon opens on a stack of books being placed on a conveyor belt. One by one, a series of mechanical arms, powered by a slowly turning water wheel outside the window, picks up each book. A pair of brass fingers delicately opens the cover. A lens, like a monocle on a long jointed arm, swings down to read the title page. There's a moment of quiet contemplation, a series of soft clicks and whirs from within the machine's central housing, and then the book is gently placed onto another conveyor belt, which carries it up and away into the towering shelves. The plot, if you could call it that, is the process. We follow a single red leather-bound book on its journey. We see it lifted, examined, and then sent on its way. A series of pulleys and levers guides it along a track that spirals up the wall. A small, automated feather duster tickles its spine as it passes. Another arm, with the gentle precision of a librarian, pushes it perfectly into its designated spot on a high shelf, between two other books. The sound design is crucial. There is no frantic musical score, just the steady, soothing sound of the machine itself, the gentle slosh of the water wheel, the soft thump of books on the conveyor belt, the hypnotic tick-tock of the central clockwork mechanism, and a quiet ambient score that sounds like it's being played on a glass harmonica. The audience who first sees the self-sorting library in a smoky theater doesn't roar with laughter as they did with Oswald. They are hushed. They are mesmerized. They are utterly captivated by this strange, beautiful, and deeply satisfying spectacle. It's not comedy. It's not high drama. It's kinetic poetry. It's a 7-minute respite from the chaos of the world. A clockwork lullaby for a stressed and anxious age. Walt and his team have not created a character. They have created a feeling of order, of gentle purpose, of quiet, mechanical grace. After the short, as the lights come up, people don't talk about gags or punchlines. They talk about the bit where the mechanical arm almost put the book in the wrong place, paused, and then corrected itself with a soft, almost apologetic little whir. They talk about the sheer, hypnotic pleasure of watching something work so perfectly. The Disney studio has found its voice, and it is not a squeak. It is the gentle, reassuring click of a well-made machine, performing its quiet, wonderful, and utterly pointless task. And as Walt begins to sketch his next project, it's not a farmyard adventure. It's an automated, steam-powered cloud seeding machine, designed to create perfectly shaped, fluffy white clouds for a lazy afternoon. The work is just beginning, and the world of animation, and indeed, the world itself, will never be quite the same. The path ahead is quiet, intricate, and gleaming with the soft light of polished brass, waiting patiently to be built, one gear at a time. It is a quiet thing, the birth of a new idea. It rarely announces itself with a trumpet blast. More often, it's a subtle shift in the light, a change in the rhythm of a room. And the Disney Brothers studio, in the wake of its first quiet success with the self-sorting library, was a place of new rhythms. You can almost picture it. The drawing boards, once covered in sketches of jaunty, anthropomorphic animals, are now pinned with intricate schematics. The animators work with compasses and protractors as often as they do with soft leaded pencils. They talk not of personality, but of process, not of character arcs, but of gear ratios. Walt and Ub Iwerks are bent over a large sheet of vellum, designing their next masterpiece. This is the steam-powered cloud seeding machine that had captured Walt's imagination. But in the collaborative, gentle quiet of the studio, the idea has evolved. It's no longer just about making clouds. It's about composing them. They call it the Cumulus Concerto. The machine they design is a thing of steampunk beauty. It sits on a grassy, stylized hill, all polished brass and warm copper, looking like a misplaced locomotive that has decided to become an artist. It has a single, large boiler, tended by a small, automated arm that delicately places perfectly uniform lumps of coal into its furnace. The steam it generates doesn't just power the machine. It becomes the raw material for the art. The animation for this short is a masterclass in patience. We watch as the sun rises, its light glinting off the machine's polished surfaces. A pressure valve releases a soft, satisfied hiss. A series of gears begins to turn, slowly at first, then settling into a steady, reassuring rhythm. The main chimney, a long, elegant copper pipe, begins to puff out thick, white clouds of steam. But this is where the magic lies. Attached to the chimney is a complex array of nozzles and shapers, controlled by a system of levers and cams that looks like a metallic spider web. As the steam emerges, these shapers move with a slow, deliberate grace. The first cloud that forms is a perfect sphere. It hangs in the air for a moment, a pearl against the blue, before a gentle, automated bellows gives it a soft puff, sending it drifting across the sky. Then the shapers reconfigure. The next puff of steam is sculpted into the distinct woolly form of a sheep. Then another and another, until a small, fluffy flock is drifting peacefully overhead. The machine pauses, as if considering its work. A small arm emerges, holding a tiny watering can, and it gently sprinkles a fine mist into the boiler, creating a denser steam. The shapers engage again, and this time the cloud that emerges is a long, sinuous, and unmistakably cheerful-looking dragon, which chases the sheep across the sky in a slow, silent, and entirely unthreatening pursuit. The short film is a triumph of gentle whimsy. There is no dialogue. The only soundtrack is the soft chuff of the steam engine, the quiet click-clack of the levers, and a meandering melody played on a calliope, its notes seeming to rise and fall with the steam pressure. When the Cumulus Concerto is released, it solidifies the studio's strange new place in the public imagination. These aren't just cartoons. People begin to call them Disney's Clockwork Lullabies. In the increasingly frantic world of the late 1920s, with the stock market booming and the pace of life accelerating, these 7-minute films become an unlikely sanctuary. Theaters start advertising them specifically. Feeling stressed? Come see the latest Disney mechanical meditation, continuous showings. And, of course, success breeds imitation. Other animation studios, baffled but intrigued by this new trend, rush to create their own versions. But they fundamentally misunderstand the appeal. A rival studio, say, the one run by Max Fleischer, might release a short called The Automated Breakfast. And it is everything the Disney shorts are not. Their machine is a frantic, clanking thing of iron and steel. A series of aggressive arms cracks eggs with too much force, splattering them everywhere. A cannon fires toast across the room, which is then buttered by a flailing, spinning brush. A coffee pot boils over with a shriek. The whole thing is set to a manic, jazzy soundtrack. It's meant to be funny. It's a series of gags. The machine is the butt of the joke, a clumsy, chaotic failure. And audiences laugh, yes, but it's a nervous, anxious laughter. It doesn't soothe them, it winds them up. It reminds them of the chaos of their own lives. The film is a moderate success, but it's forgotten in a week. It has no soul. It misses the point entirely. The point isn't that the machine fails. The point is that Disney's machines, in their beautiful, pointless way, succeed. Meanwhile, back in his quiet, humming workshop of a studio, Walt is already dreaming up the next Clockwork Lullaby. He's thinking about sound. He's thinking about rain. And so is born their third masterpiece, the Nocturne of the Rain Taps. This time, the machine is built into the very structure of a house, a cozy, cottage-like building nestled in a forest. It's a system designed to create music from a rainstorm. The film opens on a dark, cloudy night. The first drop of rain falls onto a large copper leaf attached to the gutter. The drop rolls down the leaf's vein and falls, with a single, perfect plink, onto a tiny, tuned brass drum. As the rain intensifies, the whole house comes alive. The gutters are not just gutters. They are a network of channels that divert the rainwater. The water flows into a series of bamboo pipes of different lengths, creating a series of soft, hollow wooden tones. It drips onto tuned glass chimes, creating a delicate, sparkling melody. It fills a series of small, tipping buckets that, when they overflow, splash into pools of water of varying depths, creating a percussive bass line. The character of this film is the storm itself, and the house is its instrument. We watch the rain start as a gentle pitter-patter, and the music is simple, a few sparse notes. As the storm builds, the music becomes more complex, a beautiful, random, and yet somehow coherent symphony. A flash of lightning outside the window illuminates the whole intricate system for a brief second, and the thunder that follows is answered by a deep, deep resonant gong from the largest of the water-filled basins. There is no automation here, no gears or steam. The machine is passive. It is played by the weather. It is a collaboration between nature and gentle, thoughtful design. It is, perhaps, the most soothing film ever made. The success of these shorts changes the very nature of the Disney studio. It begins to attract a new kind of talent, not just gag men and cartoonists, but people with backgrounds in architecture, in engineering, in music theory. They even hire a retired clockmaker from Switzerland, a man named Anton, whose sole job is to consult on the believability of the gear trains and escapements in the animations. The studio becomes a haven for gentle dreamers and meticulous craftsmen. The model department, instead of sculpting clay figures of characters, builds exquisite working miniatures of the machines from brass and wood and glass. These models aren't for animation reference. They are works of art in their own right, and they sit on pedestals in the studio lobby, ticking and whirring softly, a constant, gentle reminder of the company's unique mission. And you have to wonder, as Walt Disney sits in his office late one night, the soft sound of Anton's newest miniature automaton, a mechanical cat that perpetually chases a brass mouse around the base of a lamp, ticking on his desk. What is he thinking? He has created a new art form. He has captured the public's imagination. He has built a successful, thriving business from the ashes of his failure with Oswald the Rabbit. But Walt is a restless soul. His ambition was never just to make films. It was to create worlds. And as he looks at the beautiful, intricate, but ultimately two-dimensional machines on the screen, and then at the small, tangible, three-dimensional automaton on his desk, a new thought begins to form. A thought far grander than a feature-length film. He thinks, what if people didn't just have to watch these machines? What if they could walk among them? What if he could build a place, a garden, not of flowers, but of mechanisms? A park filled with the gentle, hypnotic motion of his Clockwork Lullabies, where people could come and not just see, but hear and feel and experience that soothing, mechanical grace in person. A place of kinetic poetry under a sky filled with perfectly shaped steam-powered clouds. The idea is absurd. It is impossibly ambitious. It is, perhaps, the most wonderful idea he has ever had. An idea, once it takes root in a mind like Walt Disney's, is a restless thing. It is not content to remain a sketch on a page or a flicker on a screen. It wants to breathe air. It wants to cast a shadow. It wants to be real. And so, the notion of a garden of mechanisms, a physical place of clockwork lullabies, began to consume him. But how does one begin to build a dream? You don't start with a mountain. You start with a single, well-placed stone. For Walt, that first stone was a conversation. One evening, after the last animator had gone home, he sat in his office with the two men who formed the bedrock of his enterprise. His brother Roy, the quiet, steady anchor who navigated the treacherous waters of finance, and Iwerks, the introverted genius who could seemingly build anything he could draw. On the table between them lay not a budget sheet or a storyboard, but a rough, hand-drawn map of a small, imaginary park. "I want to build it," Walt said, his voice soft but firm with conviction. "All of it. A place where people can walk through the films." Roy, ever the pragmatist, ran a hand through his hair. "Build it." "Walt, we're an animation studio. We make moving pictures. We don't build public utilities." He looked at the drawings of steam engines and water features with a furrowed brow. The liability alone, the cost of the brass. But Iwerks said nothing. He leaned forward, his eyes tracing the lines of a cutaway diagram showing the inner workings of a proposed clockwork aviary. He wasn't seeing costs or liabilities. He was seeing a challenge. He was seeing a beautiful, intricate puzzle made of gears and springs and levers, and he was already solving it in his head. The escapement on this hummingbird's wing will need to be incredibly fine, murmured, almost to himself. "We'd have to machine the gears ourselves, maybe use ruby chips for the bearings, like in a watch." And in that moment, the dream became possible. Roy saw the gleam in Ub's eye, the familiar fire in Walt's, and he knew. He might not have understood the mechanics of it, but he understood the mechanics of his brother. He sighed, a sound of fond resignation. "All right, Walt. Show me the numbers. Let's see how much brass a dream is going for these days." The first step was finding a space, and it didn't come from a grand real estate deal. It came from a simple act of looking out the window. Next to the Disney Brothers studio on Hyperion Avenue was a forgotten, triangular plot of land. It was an awkward shape, deemed unusable by developers, and had become a dusty lot of weeds and wildflowers. But where others saw an eyesore, Walt saw a canvas. It was small, intimate, and best of all, it was right there. They bought it for a pittance. The construction phase of what would come to be called Walt Disney's Mechanical Garden was unlike any other building project in Los Angeles. It was not a flurry of bulldozers and cranes. It was a slow, deliberate act of creation, more akin to the building of a grand pipe organ than a public park. The team was a curious collection of artisans, Swiss watchmakers lured away from their quiet benches, German cabinet makers who understood the soul of wood, and local metalworkers who discovered a newfound joy in polishing copper instead of plumbing it. The sounds of the lot were not of roaring engines, but of quiet industry. The rasp of a file on a brass gear, the gentle tap of a jeweler's hammer, the satisfied sigh of a perfectly fitted dovetail joint. The air smelled of sawdust, linseed oil, and the sharp, clean scent of hot solder. There was no grand opening ceremony, no ribbon to be cut, One sunny Saturday morning in the early 1930s, the simple wrought-iron gates were simply unlocked, and a small, hand-carved wooden sign was placed out front. The Mechanical Garden, a place for quiet contemplation. Strolling is encouraged. The first visitors were hesitant. They peered in, drawn by the strange, gentle sounds emanating from within. What they found was a world unlike any other. The centerpiece, visible from the entrance, was the great Cumulus Concerto machine, standing proudly on a small, manicured hill. Its brass boiler gleamed in the sun, and every few minutes, with a soft, deep chuff, it would puff a perfectly formed, steam-powered cloud sheep into the sky, which would then drift slowly towards the Hollywood Hills before dissipating. Families didn't rush past it. They would find a bench, unwrap their sandwiches, and just sit watching a machine that did nothing useful, but did it with such grace and purpose that it was utterly captivating. To the left of the hill was the rain tap house. Visitors could walk through the small, cozy cottage, and even on the sunniest day, a gentle, artificial rain would be falling on its roof, created by a closed-loop system of pumps and channels. Inside, the sound was magical. The collected water would trickle and drip through the house's network of chimes, bamboo pipes, and tuned drums, creating a constant, ever-changing, and deeply soothing symphony of sound. It became a favorite spot for young couples on first dates, a place where conversation was easy and silences were comfortable. But the true heart of the garden lay in the smaller details, the little wonders tucked away in quiet corners. The most beloved of these was the brass butterfly house. It was a beautiful glass conservatory, like an old Victorian greenhouse, filled with intricate metallic flora. On the leaves of copper ferns and the petals of tin roses rested dozens of tiny clockwork butterflies. As you watched, a butterfly would stir. Its delicate, filigreed brass wings would begin to beat, a tiny, almost inaudible whirring sound filling the air. It would lift off from its perch, its legs retracting, and fly in a slow, graceful, looping path across the conservatory to another flower. When it landed, the motion of its landing would engage a tiny gear in its legs, which would slowly, over the course of a minute, rewind the spring in its body, and then it would sit, motionless and beautiful, until the spring was tight again, ready for its next brief, wonderful flight. There was no grand spectacle, just this constant, gentle, self-sustaining ballet of tiny machines. It was, in its own way, perfect. The mechanical garden became a quiet sensation. It was the anti-amusement park. There were no thrill rides, no barkers, no frantic energy. The food sold was simple: hot tea, spiced cider, and gingerbread cookies shaped like gears. The only souvenirs were small, beautifully illustrated guidebooks and expensive, handcrafted music boxes that played the theme from The Nocturne of the Rain Taps. It changed the culture of the city in a small way. People started referring to anything that was pointlessly beautiful and well-made as a real Disney. It became a place of pilgrimage for engineers, artists, and anyone whose nerves were frayed by the growing anxieties of the modern world. They nicknamed it the Ticking Park. Walt would often walk through the garden in the evenings, after the last guest had departed. He would listen to the chorus of gentle sounds, the distant chuff of the cloud machine, the soft music from the rain tap house, the collective, almost imperceptible whir of 100 rewinding butterflies. He had done it. He had built his dream. He had created a three-dimensional clockwork lullaby. But as he stood on the grassy hill, looking out from his small, perfect, ticking world, his gaze would invariably drift past the boundaries of his little lot. He would look towards the distant, undeveloped hills of Griffith Park, dark and full of promise against the sunset. And he would think, this is a garden. But what if he could build a city? A whole city, running on the same principles of gentle mechanics and thoughtful design. A city of quiet efficiency and whimsical beauty. Not a place to visit for an afternoon, but a place to live. A place where the streetcars were powered by silent, intricate clockwork, where the public fountains were elaborate water-based musical compositions, where the streetlights were powered by bioluminescent fungi tended by automated gardeners. The thought was so audacious, so immense, that it almost frightened him. The mechanical garden was a masterpiece of the miniature. This new idea, this was a masterpiece on the scale of civilization itself. And as the steam-powered sheep drifted overhead, he knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified him, that his work was not done. It had, in fact, only just begun. The map on the table in Walt's secret workshop was no longer just a map of a park. It had begun to sprawl, to grow tendrils of ink that reached for the edges of the vellum. It was a place in the process of becoming. But a city is more than a collection of beautiful objects. It is a living system, and a living system needs arteries. It needs a way to move. And that was the first great challenge for this quiet assembly of artisans and engineers. The problem of transportation. No automobiles, Walt had declared from the very beginning. The automobile, to him, represented the very antithesis of their philosophy. It was a machine of noise, of chaotic individualism, of sharp, jarring movements, and the acrid smell of exhaust. An automobile was a shout. His city was to be a whisper. The team, this unofficial guild of practical dreamers, sat around the great oak table, sketching ideas. Anton, the Swiss clockmaker, proposed a vast network of funicular railways, pulled by perfectly balanced counterweights and silent water-powered gears. An architect from Germany sketched elegant enclosed walkways, like Venetian canals made of glass and steel, where pedestrians could stroll, protected from the elements. But it was Ub Iwerks who, as always, found the solution that was both the most practical and the most magical. He had been staring at one of the studio's prized miniature models for hours, a tabletop version of the self-sorting library. He was watching the little brass arm pick up a tiny, leather-bound book and place it on a conveyor belt. But his focus was on the track the book followed, a grooved channel that guided it perfectly on its journey. He picked up a piece of charcoal, and on a fresh sheet of paper, he drew a single, perfect sphere. Then, beneath it, he drew a grooved track. "We've been thinking too big," he said, his voice quiet. "We've been thinking about trains and public systems, but the heart of our work has always been in the personal, the intimate, the single book, the individual butterfly." He began to sketch with a quiet intensity. "It's not a train," he explained. "It's a sphere, a personal sphere, just big enough for a family of 4, made of glass and polished cherry wood. It sits in a track, a sunken channel that runs where a street would be." "How does it move?" asked Roy, already seeing a mountain of invoices for custom glass blowing. "Clockwork," Ub replied, a small smile touching his lips. "Each sphere has its own long-lasting spring mechanism. When you want to go somewhere, you get in and you wind it. Not with a crank, of course. A simple weighted lever you pull down once. That gives it enough potential energy for, say, 5 miles of travel. but the sphere itself doesn't decide where to go. This was the genius of it. He drew a small, intricate control panel inside the sphere, a series of brass dials and polished wooden knobs. "You set your destination here," he said, pointing with the charcoal. "Let's say the observatory hill. You set the dial, you pull the lever, and then you just relax. The sphere rolls silently into the main channel, and the track system itself does the rest." The city, he explained, would be a network of these grooved tracks. At junctions, a series of silent, automated switches, controlled by a central clockwork brain beneath the city, would read a signal from the sphere and guide it onto the correct path. It was a public system made of private journeys. There would be no traffic jams, no frantic searching for parking, no noise. Just the soft, whirring hum of thousands of polished spheres gliding through the city like marbles in a vast, gentle, and exquisitely designed game. The idea was met with a moment of stunned silence, and then a slow, collective intake of breath. It was perfect. It was elegant, beautiful, and it captured the very soul of their project. And so, the Guild of Practical Dreamers was formally born, and it was organized into departments, each tasked with designing a different facet of this clockwork utopia. Iwerks, naturally, was made the head of the Department of Kinetic Harmony, tasked with designing the sphere system and all other large-scale public mechanisms. His workshop became a forest of blueprints, a place of complex equations and beautiful, terrifyingly intricate miniature models of track junctions and sorting hubs. The central hub, where all the tracks converged before branching out again, was designed to be a spectacle in its own right, a vast, open-air cathedral of moving parts, where thousands of spheres would glide and switch in a silent, hypnotic, and perfectly synchronized ballet. A quiet, thoughtful woman named Eleanor, who had once designed intricate dollhouses, was put in charge of the division of domestic automata. Her team was tasked with rethinking the objects of everyday life. If the city itself was a clockwork lullaby, then the home should be a music box. They didn't invent machines to save labor. They invented machines to add grace. Their most celebrated creation was the sun and moon toaster. It wasn't a chrome box that violently ejected scorched bread. It was a beautiful object of porcelain and brass. You would place a slice of bread on a small ceramic tray. A brass arm, shaped like a stylized sun, would gently lower it into the body of the machine, between two golden heated filaments. On the outside, a second arm, this one shaped like a crescent moon, would begin to slowly track across a numbered dial, its pace governed by a tiny, silent hourglass inside. When the moon reached the desired number, a soft, single chime would ring, and the sun arm would gently lift the perfectly toasted bread and present it to you. The process took a full 2 minutes. It was inefficient. It was meditative. It was the most popular wedding gift of its generation. They designed teapots with tiny, steam-powered paddles that gently stirred the brewing leaves. They created self-dusting picture frames where a fringe of fine ostrich feathers would make a slow, circular sweep of the glass once a day, powered by the subtle changes in atmospheric pressure. These were not gadgets. They were companions, quiet, mechanical members of the household that added a layer of gentle, predictable magic to the day. And then there was the most unique and perhaps most important department of all, the Office of Public Sonics, run by Anton, the old Swiss clockmaker. His job was to design the sound of the city. With no car horns, no sirens, no rumbling engines, a new sonic language was needed. Anton designed a system of chimes, a citywide instrument. At the top of every hour, it wasn't a jarring bell that rang out, but a slow, deep, resonant chord, played by a series of massive, perfectly tuned bells housed in a central tower. The chord would hang in the air for a full minute, a moment of collective, peaceful reflection. Public announcements were communicated through melody. A soft, ascending, three-note arpeggio, played on smaller chimes located at every track junction, signified that a public transport sphere, a larger, multi-family version, was arriving. The announcement of a public holiday was a long, complex, and joyful carillon that would play for 10 minutes in the morning. Even emergencies were handled with grace. The fire alarm wasn't a terrifying klaxon. It was a rapid, urgent, but not unpleasant cascade of bells, a melody that conveyed urgency without inducing panic. It was a sound that made you want to walk briskly and help your neighbor, not to scream and run. The work of the guild was slow, deliberate, and joyful. They were not just building a city, they were composing it. A symphony of motion, of domestic ritual, of public sound. And as Walt reviewed the endless stream of beautiful, thoughtful designs that flowed from his workshops, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The parts were exquisite. The systems were elegant. But he knew something was still missing. A city is more than its arteries and its houses and its sounds. It needs a heart, a central place where people gather not just to pass through, but to be. A town square. He looked at the empty space at the very center of his sprawling map, the place where the great sorting hub of the sphere system would dive underground to do its work. Above it was a blank canvas. What would go there? What single great mechanism could serve as the beating, mechanical heart of this entire, impossible dream? A blank space on a map is a powerful thing. It is a question waiting for an answer. And for Walt Disney, the large, circular plaza at the heart of his nascent Clockwork City was the most important question of all. He knew, with an instinct that went deeper than architecture or engineering, that whatever he placed there would define the character of the entire enterprise. It would be the city's soul, made manifest in brass and wood. His team, the Guild of Practical Dreamers, had offered their own beautiful solutions. Anton, the clockmaker, had designed a breathtakingly complex timepiece, a tower of interlocking gears and dials that would not only show the time on Earth, but the precise positions of the planets, the phases of the moon, and the shifting of the constellations. Eleanor, from Domestic Automata, had imagined a grand mechanical fountain, where stylized metal birds would dip their beaks to drink, triggering a cascade of chimes as they moved. Eworks, ever ambitious, had sketched a miniature, working mountain range, complete with a self-contained weather system that would produce tiny, perfect rainbows on the hour. They were all wonderful ideas. They were all elegant and soothing, but to Walt they felt static. They were beautiful objects to be observed, but they didn't tell a story. And for all his newfound passion for mechanics, Walt was, at his core, a storyteller. The answer, when it came, didn't arrive in a flash of inspiration. It arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Walt was in his personal library at the studio, a small room lined with books, not just on art and animation, but on history, folklore, and mythology. He had his original book of medieval art open on his lap, the very one that had started him on this unlikely journey on that long train ride home. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He was just revisiting the source, letting his eyes drift over the familiar, whimsical marginalia. The knight fighting the snail, the monkey playing the bagpipes. And then he saw it. It wasn't a single drawing, but a sequence, a tiny story told in 4 panels, crawling up the side of a page of Psalms. The first panel showed a monk's hand planting a single, stylized seed in the ground. In the second, a small sprout had emerged. In the third, it was a tall, elegant flower. In the fourth, the flower had wilted, dropping a new seed back into the earth. It was a simple, profound cycle. A narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end that also contained the seed of its own beginning. It was a story of a single day and of every day. And Walt closed the book, a slow smile spreading across his face. He knew what the heart of his city would be. Not just a clock, not just a fountain. It would be a clock that told the story of the day. He called it the Grand Orrery of the Day. The construction of the orrery was the guild's masterwork. The central plaza was excavated, and beneath it, Iwerks and his team built the most complex clockwork mechanism ever conceived. It was a silent, subterranean brain of gears, cams, and governors, all powered by the slow, steady pressure of a deep, artesian well. On the surface, what the public saw was a thing of breathtaking simplicity and grace. The plaza was dominated by a vast, sunken disk of polished black slate, perhaps 200 feet in diameter. Inscribed into its surface were concentric rings of gleaming brass track. The entire disk was surrounded by a low, carved stone wall that served as public seating. The orrery had no hands, no numbers. Its purpose was not to give you the precise time, but to show you where you were in the journey of the day. And it did this through a silent, continuous performance, a mechanical play in 4 acts. The performance began each morning at precisely 6 o'clock, with the first light of dawn. A hidden section of the slate would retract and a figure would rise silently from below. It was the first of the orrery's 4 archetypes, the gardener. He was a life-sized automaton, crafted from warm, polished oak, with joints of gleaming copper. He had no face, just a smooth, contemplative head. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace. He would glide along the brass tracks to the very center of the disc, where he would kneel. From a pouch at his side, he would take out a single, uncut crystal. He would place this crystal, this seed of light, into a small recess in the slate. And then, his work done, he would glide back to the edge of the disc and descend, the slate closing silently over him. For the next 3 hours, that crystal would be the only thing in the orrery. But as the sun climbed higher, a tiny internal mechanism would cause it to slowly rotate, catching the morning light and casting a single sharp, ever-moving beam across the dark slate. Then, at 9 o'clock, a second figure would rise. The scholar. Crafted from darker walnut with accents of silver, he carried not a seed pouch, but a beautiful, intricate brass astrolabe. He would glide out to the crystal, which was now visibly larger and brighter. He would not touch it. His role was one of contemplation. He would raise his astrolabe to the sky as if taking a measurement from the sun. He would then peer at the crystal through a large magnifying lens, as if observing its growth. He would make a slow, circular patrol around the central light, his movements thoughtful and precise. He was the guardian of the morning's potential. At the stroke of noon, the orrery would reach the day's first crescendo. Both the gardener and the scholar would descend, and a third figure would rise. This one clad in warm, cheerful cherry wood and bright, polished brass, the baker. He would glide to the center, where the crystal was now a brilliant, multifaceted globe, pulsing with the stored light of the morning. With gentle, cupped hands, the baker would lift the globe of light. He would carry it to a small, clockwork oven that had risen from the slate near the edge. He would place the light inside, and the oven door would close with a soft, satisfying thump. And there it would remain, a warm, contained glow visible through the oven's small circular window throughout the afternoon. The people of the city, for by now the first phases of the clockwork metropolis were inhabited, came to set their lives by these gentle narrative rhythms. It changed their language. "Let's meet for lunch" became "Let's meet when the baker has taken the light." An afternoon appointment was after the oven is warm. They didn't check the time. They observed the story. The orrery became the city's living heart. On sunny afternoons, people would pause their silent gliding spheres at the edge of the plaza and just watch. Children wouldn't run and shout around it. They would sit on the low stone wall, mesmerized, watching the baker's slow procession, feeling the gentle, metaphorical warmth of the contained light. The aesthetic of the orrery began to permeate the entire culture. The simplified, graceful forms of the four archetypes became a common motif. You would see the shape of the gardener carved into the back of a public bench, or the scholar's astrolabe worked into the pattern of a textile. The city was developing a shared visual language, a culture born not of ancient history or conflict, but of a shared, daily, mechanical poem. And as the afternoon sun began to dip lower, the fourth and final figure would make its appearance. At 3 o'clock, the stargazer would rise. He was carved from a deep, ebonized wood, inlaid with constellations of mother-of-pearl. He would emerge on the opposite side of the plaza from the baker's oven. He did not move towards the center. He simply stood, his head tilted upwards, as if waiting for the first stars to appear in the afternoon sky. He was a figure of quiet anticipation, a promise of the night to come. Walt Disney would often stand on a balcony overlooking the plaza, watching the silent, daily drama unfold. He watched the people watching the orrery. He saw the calm, the gentle focus, the shared sense of peace that it created. He had built more than a city. He had built a state of mind. But his creation, perfect and self-contained as it was, existed in a world that was anything but. The years were passing. The early 1930s were giving way to the middle of the decade. And beyond the quiet, chiming borders of his utopia, the rest of the world was growing louder. The sounds were not of chimes and whirring gears, but of rising tensions in Europe, of political rallies, of the distant, unmistakable rumble of a coming storm. And you have to wonder, as Walt stood there, listening to the gentle hum of his perfect city, could he hear that other, harsher sound, far away on the wind? And what would happen when his city of whispers had to finally face a world of shouts? How could a place built on the principle of kinetic poetry respond to the chaotic prose of human history? The question hung in the air, as quiet and as patient as the stargazer, waiting for the sun to set. The story of a day, as told by the grand orrery, was always a perfect one. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and each part flowed into the next with a silent, mechanical grace that was the very essence of the city Walt had built. As dusk settled, the final act would play out. The baker, having tended the captured light all afternoon in his clockwork oven, would emerge once more. He would open the oven door, and the light within would have changed. It was no longer the brilliant, sharp globe of midday, but a soft, warm, golden sphere, the color of sunset. He would carry this mellowed light back to the center of the great slate disk. At the same time, the stargazer, the dark, patient figure of the evening, would finally begin his own slow journey from the plaza's edge. The two automatons would meet at the center. The baker would offer the golden sphere to the stargazer, who would accept it with a slow, reverent nod. The stargazer would then hold the light up, not to the sky, but towards the city, as if sharing the last of the day's warmth with its people. And then, just as the real streetlights, those gentle bioluminescent fungi, began to glow in their ornate wrought iron housings, the stargazer would descend back into the earth, taking the light with him, leaving the plaza a quiet, dark mirror, ready for the gardener to plant a new seed of light at dawn. It was a cycle of profound and reassuring peace. But peace, even the most artfully constructed peace, is a fragile state. The outside world, the world of shouts, did not arrive with an invading army. It arrived as a series of small, almost imperceptible glitches in the city's perfect rhythm. The first sign of trouble came from the workshops of the Guild of Practical Dreamers. It was a memo, circulated by Walt Disney, written in his precise, careful hand. It was a memo about brass, specifically a certain high-grade alloy they imported from a small, family-run foundry in the Belgian countryside. The foundry, the memo stated, had fallen silent. Their letters went unanswered. Their shipments had stopped. In any other city, this would be a simple supply chain issue. For the Clockwork City, it was an aesthetic crisis. That particular Belgian brass had a unique, warm luster and a resonant quality that was essential for the city's chimes. It was, in a way, the city's voice. You can almost picture the emergency meeting of the guild. It was not a panicked, fraught affair. It was a quiet, deeply serious design symposium. Anton, the clockmaker, held up one of the last remaining sheets of the precious metal. "It is not just the color," he said, his Swiss accent making the words sound even more precise. "It is the sound. Any other brass, it will sound common. It will sound like a doorbell, not a prayer." For a week, a quiet gloom settled over the workshops. But then, as always, the guild treated the problem not as a disaster, but as a new and fascinating puzzle. Ub Iwerks, in the Department of Kinetic Harmony, began to experiment. What if, he mused, they could create the same resonant quality not from a single material, but from a combination of them? His team began laminating thin sheets of more common copper and tin together, using a fine, sound-dampening layer of lacquered silk between them. The result was a metal that looked slightly different. It had a faint, almost imperceptible grain like wood, but when struck, it produced a note of even greater warmth and complexity than the original. It was a softer, deeper tone. The city's voice wasn't lost. It was just changing its register, becoming more mellow, more contemplative. At the same time, Eleanor's team in domestic automata began to see the material shortage as an opportunity for innovation. They began designing automata with gears carved from dense, oil-infused hardwoods like lignum vitae. They discovered that a well-made wooden gear, while not as durable as brass, was almost completely silent. This led to a new line of whisper-quiet household companions. Their newest creation, a self-rocking cradle with a mechanism of interlocking pear-wood gears, was so silent you could only know it was working by the gentle, rhythmic swaying of the bassinet. The city was adapting. It was turning a problem into a new form of beauty. The second glitch was not a matter of materials, but of people. The city was designed for peace, but it was not a fortress. A single, silent sphere track connected it to the outside world, primarily for the delivery of supplies and for the arrival of the few, carefully vetted new residents. But now, the people arriving were different. They were families, mostly from Germany and Austria, who spoke in hushed, hurried tones. They did not glide through the city with the casual, meditative pace of the established citizens. They scurried. They seemed to carry with them a low-frequency hum of anxiety that was utterly foreign to the city's gentle soundscape. They would marvel at the orrery, but they couldn't seem to sit still and watch it for long. Their eyes would dart around as if looking for a threat. The city's response was, as always, one of gentle, therapeutic engineering. The Office of Public Sonics designed a series of small, personal chimes to be placed near the new residential blocks, which played a simple, repeating, 5-note melody that musicologists had determined to be the most calming sequence of tones for the human nervous system. The division of domestic automata, in a moment of inspired whimsy, created the worry stone warmer. It was a small, porcelain bowl that would gently heat a collection of smooth, river-polished stones. The idea was that the newcomers, feeling anxious, could hold one of the warm, heavy stones in their hand, a tangible, comforting weight against the formless anxieties they carried with them. The city was doing what it was designed to do. It was absorbing a dissonance and trying to resolve it into harmony. Walt watched all of this from his high office, and he felt a growing unease. He saw the new, beautiful wood and metal alloys as a triumph of ingenuity. He saw the therapeutic chimes and worry warmers as a testament to his city's compassion. But he also saw the bigger picture. These were patches. These were gentle solutions to a problem whose source lay far beyond his control. The world was sick, and his perfect, healthy city was beginning to catch its fever. He realized with a heavy heart that his dream was more fragile than he had ever imagined. He had designed it to be a perfect, self-contained system, but he had forgotten one crucial detail. It was still attached to the world. And so, he called another late-night meeting. This time, he didn't unroll a map of a park or a city. He placed a single, perfect glass sphere, a spare from the transport system, in the middle of the table. "We have spent our time perfecting the inside of our world," he said to Roy and Ub. I think it's time we consider the outside." He explained his fear. The world was getting louder, more chaotic, more aggressive. And while their city could soothe a few anxious souls and innovate its way around a material shortage, it was not equipped to deal with the fundamental nature of the coming storm. "We have two choices," he said, his voice heavy. "We can try to change the world, or we can insulate ourselves from it." Roy, thinking of the vast sums of money flowing out of Europe and the dark rumors that came with them, looked grim. "You can't change the world, Walt. It doesn't listen to reason." "I know," Walt replied softly. "That's why I think we have to build the Great Quiet." It was the most ambitious project he had ever conceived. It was not a machine for making clouds or telling the story of the day. It was a machine designed to create a perimeter of perfect, untroubled silence. His idea was to build a series of massive, steam-powered resonators buried deep in the earth, in a great circle around the entire city. These resonators, based on the principles of acoustic cancellation, would be tuned to the chaotic frequencies of the outside world. They would generate an opposing sound wave, a precisely calibrated anti-noise that would meet the sounds from outside and erase them. It wouldn't be a wall of stone. It would be a wall of silence. a gentle, invisible barrier that would filter out the shouts, the explosions, the frantic energies of the world, leaving only the calm, foundational hum of the earth itself. The city would become an island of tranquility, floating in a sea of its own peaceful silence. Ubiverk's eyes lit up with the sheer, beautiful impossibility of the engineering challenge. Roy, for his part, saw the wisdom in it. It was a project of preservation, a way to protect their unique and fragile creation from a world that seemed determined to tear itself apart. And so the work began. On the farthest edges of the city, in the rolling hills that separated it from the smog and noise of Los Angeles, great circular foundations were dug. The quiet, humming industry of the Guild of Practical Dreamers was now focused on a single monumental task. They were not building a new attraction. They were building a cocoon. They were using their genius not to reach out, but to turn inward, to preserve their dream by gently and completely severing its connection to the waking world. There is a difference between quiet and silence. Quiet is the absence of loud noise, but silence, true silence, is a presence. It is a thick velvet blanket that absorbs sound and softens the edges of the world. And when the great quiet was finally activated, the city learned this difference in a single, profound instant. There was no ceremony. One Tuesday morning, a series of indicator lights on a master panel deep beneath the city shifted from amber to a soft sea green. In the rolling hills at the city's perimeter, the great subterranean resonators began to hum, their deep, subsonic vibrations canceling out the frantic energies of the world beyond. The effect was not a sudden deafness, but a sudden clarity. A man sitting on a bench in the central plaza reading a newspaper looked up, a puzzled expression on his face. He hadn't realized until that very moment that for his entire life he had been hearing a low, constant rumble from the distant freeways. Now it was gone, and in its absence he could hear for the first time the faint, metallic sigh of the stargazer automaton as it settled into its hidden alcove beneath the slate. A woman, tending her window box of herbs, paused, her trowel in hand. The distant, angry sound of a siren, a daily occurrence from the world outside, had been a part of her afternoon rhythm for years. She only noticed it now because it had been erased mid-wail, leaving behind a perfect, untroubled peace. In the new silence, the buzzing of a single honeybee exploring her lavender was as loud and as clear as a cello. The city's own voice, the gentle symphony of chimes and whirring gears, became the entire world of sound. The hum of the transport spheres was a soft bass note. The ticking of the clockwork butterflies was a delicate, percussive rhythm. And the great hourly chord from the central tower was no longer just a beautiful sound. It was the only sound that truly mattered, a punctuation mark in a book written in a language of pure tranquility. This profound silence became the city's defining characteristic. But as the years passed, the great quiet was put to the test. The rumblings from the outside world, the ones that had prompted the project in the first place, grew into a deafening, global roar. The city, of course, heard none of it, but it felt it. The great resonators, working constantly to cancel the cacophony of a world at war, began to generate a low, palpable warmth in the earth. The citizens, walking on the gently heated cobblestones, would sometimes place a hand on the ground and feel a deep, steady vibration, a faint, rhythmic pulse like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. They came to call it the hum of the world. They knew in an abstract way that the hum was a measure of the world's unhappiness. When the hum was strong, they knew the world was in pain, and they would spend more time in the rain tap house, listening to the soothing music of the water chimes. The single sphere track connecting them to the outside was quietly and without ceremony sealed. The last delivery of raw materials had been made, and the city was now truly on its own. A perfect, self-sustaining system. A ship in a bottle. This total isolation, this perfect silence, had a profound effect on the culture. With no outside world to react to, the city's gaze turned ever inward. The guild of practical dreamers, their grand civic projects now complete, did not disband. They simply shifted their focus. Their work became smaller, more personal, more intricate. This was the dawn of the age of the companion automata. These were not the simple, functional machines of the city's early days. These were objects of deep, personal significance, designed to interact with the quiet, contemplative lives of the citizens. Eleanor's division of domestic automata, which had once perfected the toaster, now turned its genius to the human soul. Their most beloved creation was the chronoscribe. It was a small, beautiful object, usually kept on a mantelpiece or a bedside table. It was a globe of frosted glass, about the size of a grapefruit, resting on a base of polished walnut that contained a complex, almost silent clockwork mechanism. During the day, it was inert. But as the sun set, and the stargazer took the last of the light from the orrery, the chronoscribe would awaken. A tiny beam of soft, warm light would shine from within the globe, and on the ceiling of the darkened room, a story would begin to unfold. It was a story told in shadows. A series of incredibly fine, laser-cut discs and lenses would rotate within the globe, projecting a slow, silent shadow play. The stories were never grand adventures. They were gentle, looping fables drawn from the city's own quiet mythology. One story, a child's favorite, was The Journey of the Little Gear. It showed the creation of a single small brass gear, its polishing, and its journey through the workshops to be placed inside the orrery, where it played its small, vital role in the turning of the day. Another popular story was The Cloud Sheep's Dream, a whimsical, abstract ballet of fluffy, shifting shapes. The chronoscribe was not a television. It did not demand your attention. It was a form of kinetic incense, a visual lullaby. People would lie in bed, watching the silent, gentle story drift across their ceiling, and they would fall asleep, their dreams infused with the quiet, mechanical grace of their city. A generation was born into this perfect silence. They grew up in a world where the loudest sound was the hourly chime, where the only conflict they had ever witnessed was the slow, shadow play pursuit of a cloud dragon chasing a cloud sheep. They were a people of profound calm, of gentle dispositions, and of a deep, almost cellular innocence. Walt Disney, now an old man, would sit on his balcony, looking out over his completed masterpiece. He was no longer the restless visionary. He was a caretaker, a curator of a perfect, timeless moment. He had done what he had set out to do. He had built a sanctuary. He had created a working, breathing clockwork lullaby that had soothed the souls of generations. But time, even in a city of clocks, cannot be stopped. It can only be measured. One evening, as he sat watching the sunset, he noticed something new. It was a flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible wavering in the soft glow of the bioluminescent streetlights. He thought nothing of it at first, but the next night he saw it again, and this time he felt it. A new rhythm in the hum of the world, coming from the resonators of the great quiet. It wasn't the deep, chaotic thrum of war he had felt in his youth. This was a different frequency. It was higher, more complex. It had a pattern, a beat. He called for Ub Iwerks, his old friend, his hands now gnarled with age, but his mind as sharp as ever. Together, they went to the central control room for the Great Quiet, a place they hadn't needed to visit in decades. On a large brass monitoring plate, a fine, diamond-tipped needle was tracing a groove in a disk of smoked glass, transcribing the chaotic energies from the outside world that the resonators were canceling. For 30 years, that groove had been a jagged, angry, chaotic line. But now, as they watched, the needle began to move differently. It began to trace a regular, repeating wave, a sound with a melody, a sound with a human voice. From the world beyond their wall of silence, a new kind of noise was beginning to emerge. It was not the sound of bombs or sirens. It was the sound of rock and roll music. It was the sound of television broadcasts. It was the sound of a world that had not only rebuilt itself, but had found new and ever more inventive ways to shout. The Great Quiet had been designed to cancel the noise of the 1930s. It was not prepared for the joyful, chaotic, and electrically amplified noise of the 1960s. And for the first time in a generation, a tiny, almost imperceptible crack had appeared in the perfect, silent shell of their world. A single, stray note from a guitar, a fragment of a broadcasted voice was slipping through the wall of silence. Walt and Ub stood there, in the quiet hum of the control room, and they listened. They listened to the first, faint, alien whisper from the world they had so carefully and so lovingly left behind. And they had to wonder, after all these years of perfect peace, was this a threat, or was it an invitation? In a world built of perfect, predictable cycles, the unpredictable is a profound event. The discovery of the sound leak in the Great Quiet did not send a wave of panic through the city. That was an emotion its citizens had never been taught. Instead, it sent a wave of curiosity, a quiet, citywide tilting of the head. The leak was not a floodgate. It was a slow, gentle seepage. The fragments of the outside world that managed to slip through the wall of silence were distorted, muffled, and dreamlike. A child, playing near one of the resonator hills, might hear a faint, rhythmic chanting, what you or I would recognize as a television commercial for soap, and mistake it for a new, strange kind of bird call. An artisan in his workshop might pause, convinced he heard a fleeting, twanging note, like a harp string being plucked with a bit too much force, and wonder if one of the city's chimes was slightly out of tune. These sonic ghosts became a part of the city's folklore. The citizens, with no other frame of reference, came to believe that the Great Quiet itself was learning to sing. They called the phenomenon the Hum's New Song. It was a mystery, a gentle and harmless one, that added a new, unpredictable texture to their otherwise perfectly composed days. In the workshops of the guild, however, the mood was different. It was one of deep, philosophical contemplation. For the first time, they were faced with a problem that could not be solved with a more elegant gear train or a more finely tuned escapement. This was not a mechanical failure. It was a philosophical one. You can almost picture the debate, held in the great circular hall of the guild, the silent, ticking models of their past triumphs standing like quiet ancestors around them. We must reinforce the resonators, argued Anton, the old clockmaker, his voice heavy with concern. The system was designed for silence. This chatter, it is a form of impurity. it is a flaw in the design. But a younger member of the guild, a woman named Lena, who had grown up knowing nothing but the city's peace, shook her head. "A flaw?" she asked, her voice soft. "Or a new voice? Yesterday, I heard a sound near my home. A voice, a woman's voice, not singing but speaking in a fast, rhythmic way. I could not understand the words, but the feeling, it was one of great excitement. It was a color of sound I have never heard before." Iwerks, his face a roadmap of a lifetime of thought and invention, listened to it all. He had spent weeks analyzing the transcriptions from the smoked glass discs. He saw the patterns, the rhythms, the complex, repeating structures of the leaked sounds. "It is not chaos," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "That is what is so remarkable. The noise of the old world was the sound of engines and explosions. It was random, destructive. This is the sound of communication. It is crude, yes. It is loud. But it has structure. It has a pulse. It is, in its own way, a machine for conveying emotion." And there, the true nature of their dilemma hung in the air. Their own city was a machine for creating peace. The world outside, it seemed, had built a machine for creating excitement, and the two were now, however faintly, touching. Walt Disney, in these final years of his life, made no grand pronouncements. He simply listened. He would take his personal sphere and glide to the very edge of the city, to the hills where the hum of the world was strongest. He would sit for hours, his eyes closed, feeling the deep vibration of the resonators in the ground beneath him, and he would listen to the faint, ghostly whispers that slipped through. He heard the strange, syncopated rhythms that made his foot tap, a sensation he hadn't felt in decades. He heard the rise and fall of voices in passionate, incomprehensible argument, a sound of raw, messy human drama. He heard the bright, cheerful, and utterly nonsensical jingles that seemed designed to implant themselves in your memory. He realized that his city, in its perfect peace, was also a city of perfect predictability. The orrery story was beautiful, but it was always the same. The chimes were lovely, but they never played a surprising note. He had built a sanctuary, but a sanctuary, by its very nature, is a place apart from life, not a part of it. He had so successfully eliminated all anxiety that he had, perhaps, also eliminated the possibility of true, joyful surprise. His final decision was not made in a great meeting, or issued as a grand decree. It was a quiet conversation, one last time, with his brother Roy and his friend "We built a wall to keep out a storm," he said, his voice thin with age but clear as a bell. "But the storm is over, and now the sun is out and the world is making a new kind of noise. I don't think we should be afraid of it anymore." "What are you saying, Walt?" Roy asked gently. "I'm saying a garden needs a little weather," Walt replied, a faint, wistful smile on his face. "It can't live under a glass dome forever." The final project of the Guild of Practical Dreamers was not one of construction, but of deconstruction. It was a project of immense complexity and subtlety. They would not simply switch off the great quiet. To do so would be to flood their innocent city with a tidal wave of incomprehensible, terrifying noise. Instead, they began to tune it. Over the course of a year, they would slowly, carefully recalibrate the great resonators. They designed a new system, a sonic sieve, that would allow them to choose which frequencies to let through. They would start with the simplest, most foundational sounds of the outside world, the whisper of the wind in the trees beyond their hills, the distant rhythmic crash of the ocean, the sound of natural rainfall. The citizens experienced this change as a slow, beautiful awakening. One day, they noticed that the music in the rain tap house was accompanied by a new, softer, more random pitter-patter from outside. They began to hear a low, sighing sound in the air that was not a machine, but the wind itself. They were not losing their silence. They were gaining a world. On the last day of that year, Walt, now very frail, sat in a chair on his balcony, overlooking the central plaza. Oob and Roy stood on either side of him. Below, the orrery was beginning its final, graceful cycle of the day. The baker was carrying the soft, golden light to the stargazer. "It's time," Walt whispered. Oob nodded and spoke softly into a small brass-speaking tube. Deep beneath the city, a final series of gears engaged. The great quiet did not fall silent. It simply relaxed. It let go of its 30-year effort to hold the world at bay. And for the first time in a generation, a clear, unfiltered sound from the outside world washed over the city. It was not a shout. It was a song, a simple melody from a car radio miles away, carried on the evening breeze. It was a sound of love and loss, of simple human feeling, played on a slightly out-of-tune guitar. It was strange. It was imperfect. It was utterly, breathtakingly beautiful. The people in the plaza below looked up, their faces a mixture of wonder and confusion, hearing this alien music for the first time. They looked at each other, and then, slowly, they began to smile. Walt Disney closed his eyes, a deep sense of peace settling over him. He had not built a perfect, timeless museum piece. He had built a living thing, and, like all living things, it had to change. It had to grow. It had to listen. The story of the Clockwork City, he knew, was not over. It was finally, after a long and beautiful lullaby, ready to begin. His city was waking up, and the whole messy, wonderful, and unpredictable world was waiting to sing it a new song. A world that has held its breath for 30 years does not exhale all at once. The reintroduction of the outside world to the Clockwork City was a slow, gentle infusion, like a single drop of dye spreading through a glass of clear water. The city's fundamental rhythm, the steady, reassuring tick-tock of its mechanical heart, did not change, but the silence in between the ticks was now filled with ghosts. A new ritual was born. In the evenings, as the stargazer automaton took the last of the day's light, citizens would glide in their silent spheres not to their homes, but to the low, rolling hills at the city's edge. There, they would disembark and simply sit on the gently vibrating earth, the hum of the world, a warm presence beneath them. They would close their eyes and listen. They were listening for the hum's new song. They would hear the faint, ghostly melodies, the strange, rhythmic speech, the bursts of what sounded like collective, rhythmic shouting that you or I would know as applause. They could not understand the words, and the music was of a structure so alien it was baffling, but they listened with the focused, analytical curiosity of a people who had been taught that everything, from a library to a rainstorm, was a system to be understood. They would return to their homes and discuss what they had heard with the quiet gravity of philosophers. The song I heard tonight, one might say to their partner over a cup of chamomile tea, brewed by a self-steeping pot, it had a curious flaw, a note that seemed to bend and ache. It was not harmonious, and yet it felt intentional. I wonder what its function could be. Perhaps it is a form of tension and release, the other might reply. like the winding and unwinding of a spring. The bent note is the winding. The return to the melody is the release. It is a machine for creating, longing. They were trying to reverse engineer human emotion. They were trying to draw a schematic for the blues. This quiet, civic fascination was, of course, formalized within the guild of practical dreamers. The great smoked glass discs that transcribed the vibrations from the great quiet were no longer just a monitoring tool. They became the city's most sacred texts. A new department was formed, run by the now venerable Ub Iwerks and the brilliant young Lena, the Department of External Sonics and Narratives. Their task was to listen, to catalog, and to try to understand. Ub, the old master, was fascinated by the how. He became obsessed with the concept of radio waves, this invisible mechanism that could carry a voice across continents. He built beautiful, intricate receivers of brass and crystal, not to listen to the broadcasts, but to admire the elegant physics of the signal itself. To him, a radio was just a new kind of orrery, one that told the story of a distant, unseen world. But Lena, she was interested in the why. She would sit for hours with delicate headphones pressed to her ears, listening to the muffled, dreamlike stories that bled through the sonic sieve. She listened to sitcoms and was baffled by the rhythmic bursts of laughter that seemed to punctuate the dialogue. She concluded it must be a form of percussive chorus, a way for the story to tell the listener when a particular emotional cycle was complete. She listened to the news and could not comprehend a narrative with so many loose ends, so much unresolved dissonance. And she listened to the music. She heard the raw, joyful energy of early rock and roll, the mournful ache of a country ballad, the complex, soaring freedom of a jazz solo. She knew these were not just harmonious systems. They were feelings, distilled into sound. And this realization sparked a revolution, a quiet, gentle revolution, as all things were in the city, but a revolution nonetheless. The city's art had always been about perfecting a process. Lena was about to invent an art of perfecting a feeling. Her first creation was unveiled not in the central plaza, but in a small, quiet gallery in the artisans' quarter. It was called The Machine for Feeling a Sad Song. It was a small, unassuming automaton that sat on a pedestal. It was made of dark, unpolished wood and dull, leaden-looking pewter. It had a single, long, slender arm that rested, like a phonograph needle, in the groove of a rotating disc. But the disc was not a record. It was a physical representation of a single, sad folk song that Lena had managed to clearly transcribe. The groove rose and fell with the melody's pitch, and was notched and textured to represent the singer's mournful vibrato. As the arm traced the groove, it did not produce a sound. It translated the song into motion. A series of cams and levers caused a set of delicate pewter leaves on the main body of the automaton to slowly droop and curl in on themselves. At the song's most heart-wrenching moment, a single drop of dark, viscous oil would well up from a hidden reservoir and trickle, like a tear, down the machine's wooden cheek. It would take 3 full minutes for the single tear to fall. The people who saw it were transfixed. It was the first machine in their history that was not designed to be soothing or efficient or even beautiful in a harmonious way. It was designed to be empathetic. It was a clockwork lullaby for a feeling they had barely understood. This single, strange, sad little machine changed everything. It gave birth to a new art form, interpretive mechanics. Artists began to build automata not to perform a task, but to embody an idea. A frantic, joyful machine of spinning, brightly colored glass was built to represent a guitar solo. A complex, argumentative automaton was created with 2 sets of gears that would clash and grind, and then find a way to mesh again, representing a domestic squabble from a radio play. The mechanical garden opened a new wing, the gallery of external emotions, where these strange new creations were displayed. It became the most popular part of the park. It was a safe way for the citizens to experience the messy, unpredictable feelings of the outside world, translated into the familiar, understandable language of a machine. But you cannot translate a feeling without eventually wanting to feel it for yourself. And the children, the generation born into this new world of whispers and echoes, were different. They would gather at the listening hills, and they would not just analyze. They would try to imitate. They would hear a simple 3-chord pop song, and they would try to replicate its emotional effect. They would bang on hollow logs to find the rhythm. They would stretch gut strings over wooden boxes to find the aching bent notes. And, most remarkably of all, they would open their mouths, and for the first time in the city's history, they would try to sing. Their first attempts were clumsy, unmusical. They did not understand the concept of projecting from the diaphragm, of controlling their breath. They were simply making emotional noise, but it was a joyful noise, a sound of discovery. The city had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of the whisper. Its children were now, slowly, carefully, teaching themselves how to shout. And so, we come to a final meeting of the Guild. The city is thriving. It has absorbed the outside world, not by becoming it, but by creating a beautiful, mechanical metaphor for it. It is a city of peace, but it is no longer a city of innocence. It has tasted the apple of human feeling and found it fascinating. Lena, now the Guild's de facto leader, stands before the old masters. "We have listened," she says, her voice clear and steady. "We have interpreted, and we have learned. But there is one thing we cannot learn from the echoes. We have built machines that can replicate the feeling of a sad song, but we have never actually heard one with our own ears. We have never seen the face of the person singing it." She walks to the grand map of the city, which now hangs on the wall like a sacred tapestry. She points to the very edge, to the single, small, circular mark that represented the sealed entrance to the sphere track. "We have spent our lives perfecting the model," she says. I think it is time we see the real thing." Her proposal is not met with gasps of fear, but with a deep, thoughtful silence. The choice is no longer about preserving their peace. It is about understanding their own humanity. They had built a perfect world, a sanctuary from all the messiness of life, and now their greatest creation was a generation of citizens who were deeply, profoundly, and beautifully curious about what that messiness felt like. The meeting ends with a single, unanimous vote. The motion is not to open the gate tomorrow or the next day. The project, like all their projects, would be undertaken with care, with thought, with a deep and abiding sense of purpose. But the decision has been made. The cocoon is ready to open. The final Clockwork Lullaby is over. It is time, at last, to wake up. The decision to open a door that has been sealed for a generation is not a small one. It is an act of profound trust, both in the world you are about to meet and in the world you have built. The Guild of Practical Dreamers approached this task with the same quiet, meticulous care they had applied to designing a self-watering flower pot. The future, like any fine mechanism, required thoughtful assembly. They would not simply open the gate and let the world rush in, nor would they send out a grand delegation. The first encounter had to be personal, intimate, and observational. They decided they would send a single emissary, an explorer, not to speak or to negotiate, but simply to see, to listen, and to return with a story. There was no debate as to who this emissary would be. It had to be Lena. She was the bridge. She understood the perfect, harmonious logic of the city, but she was the one who had also seen the beautiful, aching flaw in a sad song. She was chosen not just for her intelligence, but for her curiosity and her courage. The preparation for her journey was a quiet, city-wide project. The single glass and cherry wood sphere, the one that would carry her, was retrofitted in the workshops of the guild. It was equipped with a more powerful, long-duration clockwork spring. Its glass was polished to an impossible clarity, and in a small, velvet-lined compartment, they placed their most advanced recording device, a single, large, smoked glass disc and a fine, diamond-tipped needle, which would silently transcribe the ambient sounds of her journey. She was to bring back not just a report, but a recording of reality. On the day of her departure, there was no crowd, no fanfare. It was a still gray morning, the sky a uniform slate, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The entire guild, old masters and young artisans alike, stood in a silent circle in the subterranean hub as Lena's sphere was placed upon the long dormant track that led to the outside. Walt Disney, now too frail to leave his rooms, watched the proceedings through a beautifully crafted periscope that projected a soft, circular image onto his ceiling. He saw Lena, dressed in the simple, practical tunic of a guild member, step into the sphere. She gave a single, calm nod. The great, sealed stone door at the end of the tunnel, a marvel of counterweighted engineering, began to retract with a low, grinding sigh, the first truly discordant sound the city had heard in 30 years. A new quality of light, a gray, hazy, urban light, spilled into the tunnel, and with it came a new smell, a complex, confusing mixture of damp earth, distant rain, and something sharp, acrid, and utterly alien, the smell of exhaust. Lena pulled the lever. The clockwork spring engaged with a soft, powerful whir, and the sphere began to roll, gliding silently out of the perfect humming world it had known and into the unpredictable landscape of reality. Her journey, as transcribed by the diamond needle, was at first a story of silence giving way to chaos. She passed through the resonator hills, and the familiar, comforting hum of the world faded behind her. The sphere was now gliding through a landscape of beautiful neglect. Weeds grew in the cracks of an old, forgotten road. A sign, its paint faded to pastel ghosts, advertised a brand of cigarettes that no longer existed. A real pigeon, not a clockwork one, took flight with a frantic, clumsy flapping of wings that seemed to Lena shockingly inefficient. Then she entered the city proper, the Los Angeles of the late 1960s, and the sounds, even muffled by the thick glass of her sphere, were a tidal wave. The roar of engines, the shriek of brakes, the overlapping, competing melodies from a dozen different car radios, the cacophony of 1,000 conversations. Her little recording disc, for a full 10 minutes, was just a frenzy of jagged, panicked lines. But Lena, a product of her culture, did not panic. She observed. She analyzed. She saw the chaos, but she also saw the patterns. She saw the strange, unspoken ballet of the traffic, the way cars and people moved in a system that was constantly on the verge of collapse, but somehow, miraculously, did not. Her destination, chosen by Walt himself, was a place he remembered from his youth. A quiet, gentle point of entry into this new world. She was not going to a movie studio or a theme park. She was going to the Central Library at the University of California, a place of knowledge, a place of stories. The sphere came to a silent halt in a small, hidden alcove at the edge of the campus, a secret entrance the Guild had maintained for decades. Lena stepped out, and for the first time, she stood under the open, unfiltered sky of the outside world. The air was thick, heavy, and alive with a million smells. The ground beneath her feet was not perfect, smooth cobblestone, but cracked, uneven concrete. It felt messy. It felt real. She walked into the great echoing hall of the library. It was quiet, yes, but it was a different kind of quiet from her city. It was a human quiet. It was the sound of rustling pages, of soft, shuffling footsteps, of a distant, muffled cough. It was the sound of 100 different private journeys of the mind, all happening at once. And she saw the books. Not the perfectly ordered, untouched volumes of the self-sorting library. These books were used. Their spines were creased. Their corners were soft. Some had coffee stains. They were objects that had been lived with. She ran her hand along a shelf, and it was this simple, tactile sensation that finally broke through her analytical calm. She felt a lifetime of quiet, ordered perfection fall away, replaced by a feeling she had only ever known through the empathetic mechanism of a sad machine. She felt a profound, overwhelming sense of wonder. She spent the entire day there. She did not read a single book from cover to cover. She simply wandered the stacks, pulling volumes from the shelves at random. She found a book of poetry and saw, in the margins, a faint penciled note written by a student decades ago. "This is how it feels," the note said. She found a history book and saw a map of Europe with borders that were no longer correct, a silent testament to a world in constant, restless motion. She discovered the singular joy of serendipity. In the Clockwork City, a book requested was a book delivered. There were no accidents. Here, looking for a book on botany, her eye was caught by the one next to it, a novel with a curious title. She opened it and was lost. She had found something she wasn't looking for, and it was a more wonderful discovery than any perfectly executed plan. As dusk fell, she returned to her sphere. She had not spoken to a single person. Her mission was not to interact, only to observe. She placed the single smoked glass disc, now filled with the chaotic, beautiful, and utterly human sounds of her day, into its velvet case. And beside it, she placed a single object she had brought back with her. A library book, a thin volume of poetry, its spine soft with use, a forgotten pressed flower marking a favorite page. Her return to the city was met with the same silent, contemplative reverence as her departure. That evening, the entire guild gathered in the great hall. The disc was placed on a playback machine, and for the first time, the city listened to an unfiltered recording of the world. They heard the traffic, the voices, the music, the quiet rustle of a library. And when it was over, there was a long, deep silence. Then Lena stepped forward. She did not give a long speech. She did not present a complex analysis. She simply placed the old library book on the central table. "Their library is not as efficient as ours," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I saw a book of history shelved in the poetry section. I saw a volume of philosophy left on a table in the science wing." She opened the book to the page with the pressed flower. "The system is flawed," she said. "It is full of beautiful human mistakes. She looked around at the faces of her friends, her colleagues, the people who had dedicated their lives to the pursuit of mechanical perfection. "I believe," she said, a small, wondrous smile on her face, "that we have much to learn." The story of the Clockwork City does not end there. It begins. It begins a new chapter, a new, slower, and more complex journey. A journey not of building a perfect world, but of learning to live in an imperfect one. They did not abandon their beautiful machines or their soothing rhythms. They began to gently, thoughtfully, incorporate a new principle into their designs, the possibility of a happy accident. The Grand Orrery, on its very next cycle, did something it had never done before. As the stargazer took the final light of the day, a single, unexpected, and utterly beautiful grace note, a tiny, unprogrammed chime, rang out across the plaza. It was a note of pure, unplanned joy, a flaw, a perfect human flaw. The city, at long last, was not just telling the story of a day. It was beginning to tell the story of a life, and it was a story that would be filled, from that day forward, with the beautiful,